Hello, everyone. So, in this lesson, we're covering digital citizenship. And you might be thinking, okay, why? I've grown up using the internet almost my whole life, um, which is fair. And the reason we cover digital citizenship is there's often a lot going on that you didn't consider in terms of rights and responsibilities when you engage with other people online and use digital technology. So we're going to talk about some of those. So first I want to talk about digital rights. So just like you have, well, I don't know what real world rights, um, digital rights are pretty much just as important. So digital rights are the human rights that allow individuals to access, use, create, and publish digital media, and to access and use computers, digital electronics, and communications networks. Speaking from the United States, we may often take this right for granted because of our widely available access to software and the internet and the web. But not to mention our access to all kinds of digital media, art, movies, entertainment. Whereas when you go into other countries, their internet can be more heavily censored and controlled. There may be certain online games that you're not allowed to play, and you may have to try to bypass restrictions with a VPN or something. Certain social media platforms that you're not allowed to participate on, or platforms where your participation is always sort of monitored and heavily censored. Um, so not everyone actually, gets to enjoy these rights. And even in the United States, not everyone has an internet connection still. If you think about rural areas, a lot of internet companies, they still don't want to provide coverage for those places. Well, this is really a problem when we rely so much on the internet and the web today. So some key digital rights are the right to internet access, the right to freedom of expression online, digital privacy, and data protection. So the right to internet access is the right to access the internet and participate in the digital world. Like I said, we may take this for granted, but this isn't a given everywhere you are. And not being able to participate in this way can cut you off from a lot of culture globally or even domestically. You can have trouble getting information, taking advantage of opportunities like the right to be able to have business, conduct business online, have a website with your portfolio, do networking for jobs, any number of things. Be politically active. All these things that depend on you having internet access. Even the ability to say do online banking or take advantage of like online courseware. That's something that you can't do without internet access. So it's really important. And then freedom of expression online. This goes along with having that internet access. You need to be able to express yourself freely. What we see in many authoritarian countries is that freedom of expression is greatly censored within their sort of firewalled internet, and they will have to use VPNs so they can get onto platforms like Facebook or what have you. And that's why these social media websites, many of them now have official dark websites to try to be more available so that people can get onto them when they're coming from places that are heavily restricted. It's absolutely important because the free exchange of ideas and especially criticism and holding powers that be responsible and accountable to the public court, so to speak, or the court of public opinion, I think is the phrase. That's really important. Oftentimes, reforms and changes don't happen until there's some kind of public outcry, outrage, or large scale indication of civil disobedience. And so the right to express yourself online is really important. And just in terms of things like education and research, diverse perspectives are really important. And we want, ideally, our online spaces to be a reflection of this diversity of ideas, opinions, methods, approaches, philosophies, etc. And then there is the right to digital privacy. So you have a right to some level of privacy and protection in the digital realm. If you are trusting websites, businesses, services with personal information about you, then you have a right to have some protection there from that being shared indiscriminately. And the same goes for content that appears about you or may appear about you, maybe from some data collection. And that goes along with this right to data protection. If you're sharing data or if companies are tracking your data for whatever reason, for analytics to serve ads, etc., you have a right to have that data collected, stored, and used in a manner that's responsible. So probably it meets some sort of federal guidelines for security standards as far as the way they're storing it, what kind of access they're providing to the data. Like, not everyone in the world should be able to analyze your data. It should be a small group of analysts that are vetted by, whatever company, and they don't share your personal information directly with advertisers. They share kind of trends and things like that that are anonymized or pseudonymized to give you a layer of protection. And they shouldn't just be publishing your data out on the internet, right? This is Ryan's browsing history. This is what he looked at on Amazon. No, that's not okay. I guess on a related note, there's also a right to data protection afforded to us in the U.S. We have a constitution. Not all countries have a constitution, but they may have laws that afford them certain rights of data protection from the government itself. These are, by and large, sort of thrown out the window since the Patriot Act, to be blunt. But we ought to have more rights in terms of the way that our data is. Well, that may fall more into privacy, but we should have more rights as to what data is collected on us, how it's stored, and sort of how it's used even. So the right to internet access, I've already touched on this, but more and more institutions, organizations, probably the status quo people, I'd have to look at surveys to see this, but more and more we're recognizing that internet access is really a basic right at this point. It's a human right, and it's, we're in a digital age. So I think about how many hours I spend with digital electronics every day. I have two monitors in front of me. I have my smartphone here. I have to use computers all the time. I have to connect to the internet, use all sorts of software applications all the time. I can't imagine being cut off access from that. That would be like doom for me. But I mean, when you think about all the opportunities and really the need to be online these days, it kind of underscores this point of this internet access being a basic right. It's going to be hard to get a job now unless you have strong kind of in-person connections. It's going to be hard to get a job without internet access. Even if you do have the strong in-person connections, so many employers will ask you to submit things electronically through their website. They'll want to send you emails to stay in contact. Not everybody has cell service or a cell phone. If you didn't have a cell phone that has cell service, how are you going to get a call when someone wants to follow up after your interview? And this is one of the challenges. These are some of the challenges that people face when they go through periods of unemployment, and they may get cell service cut off and so on. But the point is, it's really, really hard to get by without internet access these days. And so we have this, what we call the digital divide. And this term, on the one hand, is reflective of infrastructure access. So communities that are underserved, that don't actually have reliable internet access, if any, or that could even include, I guess that could include businesses and school systems that don't have good digital technology and good internet connections. But on the other hand, it can also be used to describe kind of a skills and literacy gap. So this course is all about your digital literacies, right? So first we had digital literacy where that we were really narrowly focusing on your ability to kind of vet sources and look for bias, look for issues in credibility and relevance. But in the broader sense, when we talked about wanting to make you an informed and enlightened digital citizen, well, we're trying to make sure that you have the competencies to work effectively as someone who has to use digital tools frequently, so that you're not on the kind of disadvantaged side of this digital divide. So you can look at it as a kind of age gap divide, where older generations have less of the skills, they're less fluid, and just overall less literate with digital technologies. And my grandma, she's caught up just fine. When she worked, she had a job as I think she did data entry. So she was always reasonably savvy with a computer just because of her job. She picked up, I think we got iPhones. My parents held out before they got smartphones, but I think it was probably the 2010s. My grandma got her first iPhone. She figured it out a lot faster than my parents. I'll say that. But for my parents, getting used to that first iPhone, the iPhone 3GS, if you remember those, I think that's what they were called, iPhone 3GS, it was like the simplest things like swiping and the way you tap on apps, or especially like tapping and holding. Those kind of gestures were really, really strange to my parents. And they grew up in an age of very analog kind of technology. And really, they just saw the beginning of the digital era of computers. My dad talks about not really having internet access until college. They started to get computers with the internet, but it wasn't really something that he used. And so for my parents, they kind of come from an age where, the idea of a capacitive touchscreen and all these gestures, it wasn't really there. And so it kind of takes some people a bit longer, whereas maybe the kid who grows up from a young age and gets exposed through, maybe they have an iPad, they play online games and go to YouTube, well, they can pick this stuff up pretty quickly. Interestingly, I've noticed that my sort of people around my age and older, my age and millennials, they don't have a problem understanding file systems and files and folders, the way things are organized in your computer. But generations now, including the freshman class, so you all, a lot of you actually struggle with the concept of not knowing where your files are stored. And I think my speculation is that if you grew up not with a desktop computer or a laptop first, but something like an iPad, they kind of obfuscate the fact that your files all live in their own folders. And you kind of think as, well, whatever there is, it exists within the container of an app. So even though on the back end, everything is hiding in folders, you think, oh, well, photos belong to the photo app, and so on. And so it can be challenging sometimes for people to get used to the fact of, oh, all these files that I'm generating, whether I'm using Word or PowerPoint or sharing images, they all live in folders somewhere. So even with, today's generation, there are some digital skills that aren't necessarily implicit. You don't just come in with, even if you've been using digital technology since day one. But the implications for education and opportunity are really, I think, why this is a basic right. So freedom of expression online is about extending the same rights that we would hope you enjoy, at least with democratic values. We appreciate extending offline. We appreciate these rights in the real world. Being able to express ourselves in a democracy or a republic, I should say, is absolutely vital. And really with so much of our time and lives being spent online, it's so important. There is a balance here, and there's a fine line between community guidelines and censorship for kind of the public good. Like you've heard the expression that you may have heard the example from a teacher that yelling fire in a public theater when there is no fire is not protected by your First Amendment. So things that could cause harm like that to the public, that's where your kind of freedom of expression ends. And that's a tricky line to navigate sometimes, because there are all these arguments for, well, this type of information causes public harm, therefore we should take it down. Who's deciding those things? Is it a small concentrated group of people who all kind of have one political leaning? Or is it a wider, more diverse community? Sometimes it's not clear how the rules are being applied with community guidelines. And we're in this funny space where sometimes I think platforms will go too far in saying we're not censoring anything. And they'll get really, really dreadful, harmful content because of that. And then on the other extreme, sort of overly authoritarian, or perhaps even partisan platforms that censor certain types of speech and expression. So it's not a clear-cut thing, but by and large, I think as long as there's some sort of, I think what we need is more of a democratic consensus on who gets to decide what's harmful and what's not. And that's a difficult thing to do. So, just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? So exercise your freedom to express yourself responsibly. At the end of the day, if nothing else matters, what matters is your ability to choose to do something positive or something constructive over something negative or destructive. I mean, that's really at the end of the day what you can do. And in an era where you can either be trapped in your echo chamber, or you have sort of wider appeal or influence online, what you do does have a trickle effect. It will impact other people. It will influence other people. So you might as well try to put things out that are positive and not hateful, not looking to tear people down, but somehow be constructive. Or at least in your criticism, be balanced and not resort to name calling and all those kind of logical fallacies. So right to digital privacy, this one is tricky because we see that the ways that our digital privacy is seemingly violated all the time. So individuals have the right to control their personal information in digital media. And digital rights actually lend us protection from unlawful surveillance. So just like your house cannot just be searched for any reason whatsoever, someone needs a search warrant. There are procedures that even our government agencies are supposed to go through before they can start trying to do things like surveil you or seize your search history or things like that. There's a kind of a due process involved. Now, when the requests are made in a secret court, well, anyway, ideally, you should be informed about how your data is collected and how it's protected by digital service providers. So perhaps like Google, for example, if they're sharing your data out with other third parties, then all those third parties need to also be protecting your data. And Google actually does tell you when you say sign up for a Google account, they tell you all the ways that they collect your data. And it's kind of crazy sometimes if you actually read the terms of service. Like if you saw the original TikTok terms of service before the federal government got involved and ordered some changes, basically, it was pretty crazy. Like they had access to pretty much your whole phone's file system, all the storage, the microphone, the camera. They could keep it running, the app running in the background to access things. They basically had a keylogger. It was pretty overwhelming and pretty concerning from this privacy standpoint. But sure enough, if you looked in their kind of terms of service or the user agreement, they were pretty open about what they were collecting and what permissions that they used. So it is important to at least skim those when you're choosing whether you want to agree or not, because often it's just like, oh yeah, scroll past. No, actually take the time sometime and read what you're actually consenting to. And with data protection, organizations should meet some kind of reasonable standards. So I won't get into technical specifics, but for example, if you're using some kind of website with personal data, they're going to have to use encryption. They're going to have to encrypt the connection that you have to them. They're going to have to be storing your data securely in a database using encryption. So your data is basically scrambled by a cryptographic process that the access is restricted, so only the trusted key holders can unlock and make use of that. Key holder, I'm speaking loosely here about entities that may access it. Like the website itself has to decrypt your data when you log in to show it to you, right? That's kind of what I'm talking about. And then as far as even how they delete that data, if you go back to the data lifecycle, they should be deleting data that's inaccurate, or if you have requested corrections and you've proven your identity. And you have the right to basically, well, I guess that's getting into my next one. You have the right to be forgotten. And this doesn't always apply, but basically companies should typically honor your request to delete your personal data when it's no longer needed. So when it's no longer needed, for example, companies have to, maybe it's outdated, maybe the original purpose for it being collected is no longer relevant, so they should get rid of the data. Or you withdraw consent and say, now I no longer want you to be collecting these things. Or the information was collected at a time when you were not a legal adult, so a minor. That should also be deleted. Or of course, if it was processed unlawfully. So I want to talk about digital rights in practice. Like, we talked about these in abstract, but we're debating about digital rights all the time in the public sphere. And our governments, our parliaments, our legislatures are coming up with policies to try to balance this need for our digital rights and just kind of public health concerns. So in terms of the right to internet access, we actually have a pretty big initiative in the United States for trying to bridge the digital divide. So the NTIA is the United States' National Telecommunications and Information Administration. They have a goal that everyone will have affordable high-speed internet access by 2030. The current impact as of 2024, as of September basically, is 2.4 million plus previously unserved locations are now connected through this initiative. They've invested a total of $90 billion at this point. That's crazy. It's not crazy, but it's a lot. And NTIA has administered the vast majority of that investment. They've put broadband in 40,000 plus households. And in communities, they have distributed 21,000 plus devices. And they're kind of trying to approach this from minority institutions, underserved areas that are very much part of this digital divide, where they face some of these barriers to accessing proper digital technology and networks. And so there's this focus on kind of digital equity. They're emphasizing minority serving institutions, school systems, communities, businesses. They've secured plans in all 56 states and territories to basically continue this work of extending available internet access and distributing devices. And they're even offering $1 billion in competitive grants that different organizations can apply for to receive funding. So it's a really big initiative. And I mean, these are just facts. So it's like, it's easier to tell if you like see someone's personal anecdote or anecdote from a community. But based on just these facts, just these statistics, it looks like it's having a positive impact. Now, in terms of data privacy and protections, a recent example I wanted to show you is Instagram implementing these new restrictions for all teens in response to growing concerns of their impact on youth. So they have these 6 key restrictions now. They are setting these accounts, these teen accounts, to private by default. The messaging settings are stricter, so you can only get messages from your followers, not randos. and their content restriction level is the most sensitive that they have on the platform, and they are limiting interactions. So part of that right to privacy is people should be respecting your privacy, and so they're limiting interactions like tags and mentions to just your followers. So it's kind of keeping teenagers a little bit more in their bubble with connections that they know, and kind of trying to insulate them from the larger outside world a little bit. And they even have these daily time limit notifications. This one is more about public health. We have seen some damning reports on Meta about the way that social media impacts, especially teenage girls' self-efficacy or self-esteem. And we've seen damning reports about the health impacts of this technology on youth. So that's kind of where that's coming from. And along with that, this auto sleep mode. So they're trying to put reasonable restrictions in place. And I gotta say, as someone who picked up Instagram as a middle schooler and like would sometimes waste an entire day just like scrolling and looking at stupid stuff that really had no value, and like trying to figure out how do I cultivate this digital image and all that, I think I would have greatly benefited from these restrictions in place. At the time, there were none, right? It's the Wild West, and that's kind of the way a lot of platforms are still. But it's good to kind of see some of these restrictions enter in at a point where you're not an adult yet. You don't really have the capacity to manage all of these things and understand the impact of them. And then in terms of the right to be forgotten, we see this kind of debated among courts, especially around things like search results. And in 2019, the European Court of Justice, so this is basically the highest court in the European Union, they rule that Google does not have to apply this right to be forgotten globally. Basically, they said you have to apply it in Europe. Google's position when they argued this case was that this global application could be abused by authoritarian governments. So there is a caveat to that right to be forgotten in that it could lead to more censorship. It could lead to harm in places where there is more authoritarian kind of control. But the majority of Americans at least agree that some personal information should be basically forgettable, should be removed. So I encourage you to click on this link here, and this is a short read, and actually check that out. You'll get to see the different categories, the different types of data that Americans are saying, hey, we think that you should be able to delete this and maybe not that. It's really interesting, but I think there's an argument to be made that perhaps, at least in the US, based on this poll, we should be trying to get Google to apply this right to be forgotten a little bit more broadly. So we also have some digital ethics and responsibilities to talk about. So the key digital responsibilities when we're engaging online, number one is community guidelines, and along with that, I guess, accessible use policies, and also intellectual property, so copyright. These are important things to keep in mind. So when you use the internet, like at ETSU, you are consenting to an acceptable use policy. That's what on our screens on our computers, you click OK, and that clicking OK, that's you consenting. But you can actually look up our policy and the prohibitions, like you're not supposed to tamper with the computer network to try to basically do some kind of hack, exploit, anything like that. You're not supposed to use our computing resources for private, like commercial purposes, basically. And there are other restrictions. And so that's what we call acceptable use. Community guidelines are well, they're not hard and fast rules, but they're guidelines. So YouTube has community guidelines, for example, of what you can and cannot post. And the goal of these community guidelines is usually for some sort of protection for everyone, for users, but also for groups as well, like protecting children's right to privacy is especially important on YouTube and other platforms. and groups that could be subject to hate speech. Of course, individuals can too. So in general, community guidelines are trying to mitigate some of that. And by providing those to you, they're saying, hey, we have the right to remove your content or even remove you from the platform for violating these guidelines. Now, like I said, sometimes these can be sort of enforced or abused on partisan lines, and that can be frustrating. You know, if they're saying no mis or disinformation, who's deciding what is that mis or disinformation? Is it just something critical that maybe a particular party or power doesn't want? Or is it actually mis or disinformation? Is it actually risk to the public to have it out there? It's not always a clear-cut thing. In general, though, don't do hate speech, don't spam, don't troll people. Those are all pretty cut and dry, in my opinion. And then intellectual property. So there are different rules on different platforms, but basically, if something is copyrighted or trademarked, you need to understand that you may not be able to use that at all. And you may, for example, be able to use some of that in reaction content, as long as you're not like featuring someone's entire intellectual property. But you typically have to request permission to use copyrighted or trademarked things. You can't just use whatever music you want in your videos unless you've purchased licensing or got an explicit permission from the rights holder, basically, of that media. So that's important just to keep you out of trouble. Make sure that you're using, basically, if you don't want to request access or get licenses, use royalty-free media. So there are royalty-free images on Pixabay and Pixels and different websites, or Pexels, I guess it's called. There is royalty-free music, all kinds of things that you can use just for free. YouTube provides a library of audio that you can use. Be respectful in communication. Remember, not everyone's a bot. Dead internet theory reference. But there are real people that you're talking to. And like I said, at the end of the day, if nothing else matters, you have the choice of being constructive and positive versus not. So think about that. Think about the outcome that you would like. Do you just want to make someone angry and feel bad about themselves? Or do you want people to maybe, if you have a disagreement, do you want someone to be reflective and actually maybe absorb one of your points instead of leaving in rage or defeated or upset or whatever? So even the way you say things absolutely matters. And, you see the kind of, well, not Twitter, but X wars all the time. People ganging up on each other, this tribal mentality, and just ripping each other apart. And a lot of opinions, not a lot of facts. Respect people's opinions. They can be stupid opinions. You don't have to agree, but those public spaces are for us all to express our opinions. And at the end of the day, how much you choose to engage and get upset over this content is really going to impact you. So I encourage you not to just go too far, engaging in this sort of intense online conflagrations and drama, because it really is taking a toll on you, not just the other person who you might be abusing or defaming or canceling or whatever. And then you need to respect other people's privacy as well. So, if you know your friend's okay with you tagging them, then you may not even have to ask if that's just kind of an expectation. But generally, at least the first time, you should ask your friend, hey, is it okay if I tag you? A lot of us, we share content in friend kind of group chats or family chats, family text message chains. And that's not stuff that you should just spread out everywhere. Everybody kind of has, just because they're sharing it with you in an inner circle of friends doesn't mean they necessarily want everyone to see those photos. A lot of my friends' Snapchat pictures are very goofy and, they're not, they might be wearing more casual or less professional attire and not basically be presenting themselves the same way they would want to be presented, where they, broadcast to the worldwide internet, right? So, keep that in mind, and don't just assume that because someone shared something with you that you have the right to then share that online with everybody. And then protecting your privacy. So you want to basically take the steps that you can to protect your privacy, and definitely to prevent identity theft. So we're in an era now where this absolutely matters because data breaches are extremely common. If you live in the US, we are the biggest loser in terms of basically total monetary loss from data breaches. And that's because, we're a big target. We have a lot of internet access, we have a lot of innovation, we have a lot of opportunity, a lot of wealth. So that, of course, draws lots of targeted phishing campaigns and cyber attacks. So let's talk about how you can protect your privacy. So start with your crown jewels. So I got this from, there's a LinkedIn Learning course on this, is where I found this term. But it's basically your most valuable digital or electronic assets. Pretty much, I think for most people, this is going to be your smartphone. That's the case because you may have payment services on here, PayPal, Venmo, maybe a banking app, credit card app. You have your social media on here. You have all kinds of private photos, perhaps, email accounts on here. You may even have two-factor authentication codes. So you have basically this trove of personal information on your phone. And this is the device that you carry with you. This is the one that you're most liable to lose or have stolen. So it's really, really important. So think about your crown jewels. This would be your smartphone, probably your bank account, and it may even be something like a laptop computer for you, and your most important accounts. So that may also be not just your bank account, but what email address do you use to log in to do your banking, right? That should be a crown jewel. Your phone, because your primary phone number might be something that's connected to a lot of accounts. So this can be overwhelming to think about. It's much simpler if you think about it in terms of these three categories. What are the most important accounts, most important devices, and my identity? So let's start with your identity. First, we have your name, unique identifiers like your date of birth, your social security number, or even your DNA. We don't think about that one, but our DNA is in databases. If you use 23andMe or one of those services, you're actually sharing your DNA with a third party. Now it's stored in a data warehouse or database somewhere, and there is some limited access. Some individuals are able to access that. Your contact information, of course, your physical address, your home address, mailing address, work address, and photos that feature you, your friends and family, and possibly even your locale, and your online activity. So your identity starts with your name, and a common name may make it harder for people to find you. John Smith, that may not be very identifiable, whereas a unique name, it might help me hone in on the real you really quickly. But as soon as we pair that name, even John Smith, with another piece of information like the address, location, now we're able to uniquely identify you. And so maybe even by using Google search terms where we combine these elements, we're able to go on something like White Pages or some kind of information lookup, and we're able to find that information. In some cases, we maybe can pay $25 and get all this information about an individual, like their address, their past addresses, their kind of immediate family members, past employment, perhaps, any other kind of public records that are out there that these companies, these search companies and these data brokers will literally buy and sell this information. So this is why you want to make this information not very available online. So your name is the starting point. And your contact info, you have to think about the way it's linked to your accounts. So you need your email and your phone to be able to get those login confirmations, to recover accounts, like how many accounts have you had to recover because you can't remember your password, right? And to do two-factor authentication. Plus, if your phone number is out there, it's easier to hack you or harass you. So let's talk about, in terms of accounts, how can we protect your accounts? Well, first of all, use a password manager to help store and generate your passwords, and just don't give out your login info. Just don't do it. Unique passwords. You can also use password managers to help with this. I advise people often to use phrases like, the length of a password is important, but so is the complexity. So think of something that's memorable to you. That's also kind of, beyond 12 characters, 16 characters, something like that. So maybe your favorite ice cream flavor is chocolate. You could write, my favorite ice cream is chocolate, then throw in some numbers, throw in a symbol, and that's a very strong password. And your password manager can also help you keep track of these. And then multi-factor authentication. So this is that second layer, that second step. Often what happens in phishing attempts, and sometimes even from data breaches, is that people's passwords are exposed. And if your password is your only form of authentication, like username and password, then you may be compromised. Whereas if you had that two-factor authentication, the hacker would still not be able to compromise your account because they would need that authentication code on your phone or whatever other device. Now, the SMS form of this is not as secure, so that's when you receive text messages. So if possible, try to opt for something like the Google Authenticator or Microsoft Authenticator. So what's called time-based OTP, one-time passcodes, the codes that kind of change every 30 seconds, or something like with Microsoft where they say, are you trying to sign in? And you have to type yes to approve. And don't type yes if you're not trying to sign in. Those are typically better than the text message. Now, in terms of protecting your devices, so I covered protecting your accounts. Make sure that you have a method like with Google and Find My iPhone. You should be able to do things like remotely lock and wipe your devices. But keep in mind that this requires you to be able to sign into that account in the first place. So, for example, if I lose my phone and I'm trying to sign into my Google account so I can use Find My Device, and it's sending my two-factor auth request to my phone, that could be a problem. So that's why I say make sure that if you have two-factor authentication, that you have some kind of backup. If not backups of the 2FA codes, then some kind of account recovery option. Like some accounts, they let you export these one-time codes and they say store it somewhere safe, and you can basically use that in absence of being able to use whatever other method you have. So that's why I say that. I found this cool app in the Windows Store, and it's open source. It's called 2Fast, and I was able to basically create, you can show QR codes of your tokens, your 2FA tokens in Google Authenticator, and I was able to basically screenshot those QR codes, or I think that's what I did. I just screenshotted them, and then move them to my computer, scan them with 2Fast, and each time I scan a code, it was importing that into 2Fast, so then I have a backup, basically. You could store backups on a flash drive or external hard drive, but I would come up with some backup method. And then encrypt your storage. So it's much harder if someone steals a device that encrypts the file system to actually be able to compromise and get into that system and use that data. So with Windows, you can use BitLocker, and Mac users, you have File Vault. So basically, this requires you, yes, there's a password prompt when your computer starts up. It might be a little bit slower to decrypt your storage, but it's so much safer because if you don't employ this, well, I could take the hard drive out of if I stole your laptop, I could take the hard drive out, and chances are, if I don't have the technical expertise, I could definitely find someone who does to basically backdoor into that, either to backdoor into Windows login, or to just take all the files that are just not even encrypted, just take them off of the hard drive, copy them, access them all I want, right? So it's not very hard to do that without encrypted storage. So that's what I have for you, and I hope you have a great end of the semester.